Alrighty, on this lesson we're going to learn how to use a really powerful tool that you're going to use a lot in Photoshop. So you're going to want to get really comfortable with this tool, and it's going to take a little bit of time, so be patient with yourself. This tool is called the cloning tool, okay? It is located here on our vertical toolbar. You'll see kind of like a little stamp tool, and it's called the clone stamp tool. And that's one we're going to be using specifically for this lesson. And before we start to use it, we're going to need to duplicate our background, and we're going to call it working image. And we're going to select OK. Alrighty? What we're going to clone in this image is the clone stamping tool is used to remove objects or to remove things that you don't want in your image. And we're going to remove this light here, this train light, this utility box, and maybe some of these little telephone wires and poles in the background. Okay, so first thing we need to do is we need to select the clone stamping tool. Okay, and to use this, what we're going to do is we're going to have to use our keyboard, okay? So let's make sure that we have all of our horizontal toolbar selections. We want to make sure this is set to normal mode. Always have this on normal mode. If your tool's not working, it's most likely because this got changed, okay? We also want to use like a nice soft round brush. And the size of the brush will vary depending upon what our needs are. And we want to set the opacity down to 50%. So go ahead and just type in 50, and that'll make it easier. So the reason why we want to set it at 50% is because we want to clone gradually, not just like drastically, because if you do it in a very drastic manner, it can look really bad really fast. Okay, so we want to clone gradually, and so we have more control if we set the tool at 50% opacity. So it's working at a 50% rate rather than a 100% rate. Okay, all right, so what we want to do is we want to clone these clouds over this light here. So how we do that is we have to click the Alt key on our keyboard, and you'll notice that it makes kind of like a bullseye or a target. And what that's doing is when you push that down and you hold it down, and then on your mouse, you left click your mouse once, okay? And so I left clicked it once, and then I released. Now if I move it over, do you see how you can see kind of the cloud is now kind of showing, is covering up the light? So part of that cloud that I just selected here on the on the right, is now covering this light. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to left click, okay, once. And you can see that it's starting to kind of look a little cloudy here. And I'm going to do it again. And you can see that it's starting to kind of fill in this light. And as I do that, you can see like a little plus sign to the right. That plus sign means that whatever is in the plus is being cloned in the circle, okay? So whatever is in the plus is being cloned. So you want to keep a close eye on that, okay? Now I'm going to select a different cloud just a little bit further to the right. I'm going to select this one here, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key, left click, while I hold the Alt key down, okay? And now I'm going to release the Alt key, and I'm going to move it over, and this time you're going to see that the plus is a little further away. All right, so I'm going to start to fill in this. Fill this in very slowly and gradually, and every time I click with my left mouse, it makes a plus sign, and that means that whatever is in the little plus area is now being cloned in the circle. Okay, and my brush size is set to about 70, which is working for this area currently, so I'm just going to keep that, and I can just kind of speed this up slightly and just click a little faster. Bring this down. And I'm going to select a little bit of this blue just below the cloud. Alt, holding the Alt, left click, release the Alt, and now I'm going to bring in some blue here. I'm going to select this cloud here, Alt, left click, bring it over, and I'm going to clone. Okay, now I'm going to start selecting from this area over here because I don't want to create what is a clone pattern. What is that? Let me demonstrate it for you really quickly here. All right, so I'm going to make my brush slightly bigger. I'm going to go here and make my brush. Just notice how the tracks are starting to look parallel to each other. So we don't want that to happen, right? We don't want to, like, if I click there, guess what? I just added a little track. Well, I can go back and I can undo this. If I don't like the Clonetool design that I just created, I can go back and undo this by going over here to Edit, Undo, Clone Stamp, and then it'll take that away. So let me show you what a clone pattern is. I'm going to clone this bush right here. So I'm going to hold down my Alt, and I'm going to left click, and I'm going to select that bush. And now I'm going to bring it here, and I'm going to... Do you notice how I just made an exact pattern of that bush? That's not good. We don't want to be doing that because then that looks obvious that we've cloned something. We want to break it up. We want to break up the pattern. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my dialog box, my history dialog box. I'm going to come up here to Window. I'm going to select my history. Make sure a little check mark is next to it. And that's what this is over here. And I'm going to go back and undo that and get rid of that bush I just put there. You can see it's disappearing. Now I can do it gradually or I can just do it just immediately. And so there we go. I just go back a few steps and just get rid of it altogether. Okay? All right, so there it's starting to show up again. So that's when I first did it. And so now I'm going to just go back and go back. Okay, so you can always use your history dialog box here to undo your work if you're not happy with how it looks. So I recommend keeping this open at all times. Again, I'm going to come back and select my clone stamping tool. I'm going to using my bracket keys. I'm going to bring my brush down to about a 70, which is fine for this area here. And I'm going to this time select some of the clouds over here. So I'm going to hold down my Alt key, left click, and bring it over. And just fill in. I'm going to be careful for those mountains because I really do not want to clone away those mountains. So I'm just going to stop right above the mountains there. And I'm just going to take the light out for now. And I'm going to go back and forth. You notice how I keep going back and forth and kind of taking from different areas? This is how you avoid a clone stamping pattern. And then I'm just going to stop right above the mountains because I need to zoom in a little bit to finish this out. But before I do that, I'm going to just get rid of this part here. I'm going to use some of the green to get rid of the base of the light. So again, I'm going to hold down my Alt, left click, and I'm going to just cover up the base of the light here. Going to hold down my Alt, get rid of this kind of patch of dirt here in the gravel. Alt, I'm going to get rid of this here and just, I'm starting to notice a little clone stamping pattern, so I'm going to adjust what I'm taking slightly so that I get different patterns cloning over here. All right, now I want to zoom in on this a little bit, and I'm going to show you a trick on how to do that. I'm going to go here, I'm going to select Control on my keyboard and a plus. And you're going to notice that by going Control plus, it allows you to zoom in and zoom out. Now this lets us see what we're doing a little better. So I'm going to use my little sliding tools along the horizontal area here and down here as well on the vertical, and just kind of move up and down. And I'm going to place this right in the middle of my image so I can see what I'm doing. Now I need to clone a little more of of the pole here. So I'm going to come over here and select this and bring this in a little more. Okay. And just carefully get rid of all that. Now, I'm going to make my brush a little smaller as I get closer to the mountains because, again, I do not want to clone the mountains. Those mountains are really cool. I want to keep that mountain shape going. So what I'm going to have to do is just be really careful and that I use a really tiny brush and just carefully get rid of this. Same thing here. Okay, and then I want to get rid of the rest of this pole that's in the grass area. And the light, the train light, I want to get rid of that. Now, I'm going to have to select this horizon, and I'm going to have to be really careful when I do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my tool kind of halfway in the horizon and halfway in the ground. I'm going to hold down the Alt key. I'm going to left click, and then I'm going to move it over, and I'm going to make sure it's all lined up and straight, and I'm going to click that a few times. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Select it just slightly to the right, and then I'm going to move it over very carefully. Make sure it's all aligned, and then I'm going to left click a few times. Okay, and now I'm going to select some of this gray tones that are in the mountain here and fill in the rest of this light, and just making sure that I only select the gray tones in the mountain. And I'm going to have to kind of go halfway in between here. Select that there and kind of bring that up a little bit. And the same thing here, select that there. Bring that over and make sure the lines line up. Okay, that looks pretty good. Maybe just select the top of this mountain peak here and kind of bring it over and just kind of give the same shape of mountain peak here just to kind of blend that in. That looks pretty good. Now I need to fill this in here. So I need a smaller brush, so I'm going to even go down to like using my bracket key, probably down to like a 15, maybe 15. And I'm going to fill this in here halfway between the horizon and the gray tone mountain and just kind of fill that in there. Okay, and then I'm going to get rid of this pole here. Again, only selecting these value tones that are gray here. So I can kind of blend this in, and then I got to get it rid of here. Select the sky here a little bit. There we go. Alrighty. Looks pretty good. Now I've got this utility box I've got to get rid of. I'm going to zoom out and still see a little bit of the light, so I'm going to take that out. Just fill it in a little more with some of these bushes. And I can see this base down here. I want to get rid of this. Fill in this part here. Maybe make a size 15 brush. Just kind of get rid of this base of the light. There we go. Okay. Now I want to get rid of this utility box. I'm going to do it a little more aggressively. I'm going to put this at 75% so you can kind of see what happens when you up your opacity a little bit. And I'm going to use like a larger brush so I can kind of cover an area, a larger area. So Alt, left click, and I'm just going to start clicking here. I'm just going to go through the middle of this. But you see that cloning pattern? Nah, it's not a good thing. We don't want that. So I'm going to break up that cloning pattern by selecting some areas over here, some areas here, some area there. So you got to kind of like randomly select different areas. If you don't like it, undo it, okay? Now I'm going to bring my brush down a little bit because it's starting to get a little harder to work through here with a bigger brush. So I'm going to select this and I'm going to bring that in there. Some of these bushes here, I'm going to bring them over and kind of fill this in here. And you see that I'm constantly clicking. Like I just don't, click and save the same thing. I'm constantly clicking and cloning some other value tone or some other bush, okay? Really important that you do that. Otherwise, you will create a cloning pattern, and you don't want to do that because it does not look natural to have a cloning pattern. All right, I can even bring some of these bushes maybe a little higher here. I'm even taking some from way over here on the left. The idea is just you want different value tones and different texture. You don't want all the same texture, otherwise it starts to look flat. And we don't want it to look flat. We don't want any we don't want any flat looking textures. We want to see lots of bushes. Okay. As we get to the top, we've got to be real careful, okay? Be really careful as you get to the top because we don't want to go along that horizon line up there. So we got to be really careful. So I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger so that it kind of fits. You see how it kind of fits over this, right? Okay, so halfway between the mountain and halfway between the horizon line, I'm going to Alt left click, and then I'm going to move it over. And I'm going to see how I'm starting to fill that in. But you got to make sure that horizon line stays nice and flat. And also, guess what? I'm getting a little bit of a clone pattern. I got 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to have to break that up. So I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller. I'm going to select some of the green bush over here and just kind of like clone that in there. That kind of breaks it up a little bit so you don't see like a pattern. Now we're going to make this a little bigger here. I'm going to take from the right side, halfway between the mountain, halfway between the horizon line and the green plants. Alt, left click, select that. Now I'm going to move it over, make sure it's all lined up. And I'm going to carefully move this over. Now, this is probably one of the more difficult tutorials. And you will have more time to practice this tool, I promise you. And I do expect that this one will probably take you a little bit longer. You may have to redo this tutorial more than once if you're not happy with the final results. And that's okay. All right, so let's move this over here. But when we're done and we zoom out on this, it's going to look really good. It's just going to be nothing but train tracks. We won't see any of those like utility boxes or lights. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and zoom out a little bit. And there we go. So here's the before and after. You can't really even tell it was ever there. And I'm not going to worry about these little telephone wires and poles in the distance. They looked fine. And you can't ever tell that it was ever there. So that's exactly what you're doing with this project. You can, zoom in on this again and move it around and check it out just to make sure you really like how it looks. Zoom out. All right. Now it's time to put this on our image. You're going to do a print screen. You're going to come back to our Google Slide project and do a Control V. And we're going to zoom in here. And we're going to crop it here on the right. Enter, move it to the right corner. Enlarge our image up to about there. And we're going to move our boxes over. So we're going to put this here. We're going to have this one arrow. But first, let's send this to the back. So order, send to back. We're going to have this one yellow arrow pointing to the train track. And we're going to have this second box here. This green arrow is going to point all the way to the end of the track here. And this blue arrow is going to come right here to the middle. We're going to make our box slightly smaller, and we're going to move this box up a little bit and have that yellow arrow pointing to our train track. And we're going to explain how this image is using space. You're going to want to look at your definitions of space. And this box here that has the yellow arrow, we'll talk about one type of space. And this box here that has the green and the blue arrow, we'll talk about a second type of space, or possibly even two other types of space. There's 3 types of space that we'll be discussing in our definitions. And so you're going to want to make sure you refer back to your definitions for space and look at our examples here and make sure you incorporate all 3 different types of space and how it's being used in this image. And then also we're going to want to look at our technical specs. So we're going to come back and look at our contact sheet where you saved all your working images that you were going to be editing throughout this lesson. And you right-click here and you go to Properties. And we're going to look at our details. Unfortunately, oh yes, we do have details. Great. I was worried that we wouldn't have details, but we do. Okay, so this was a shot with a Nikon, and it was at f2.8, 1/6400th of a second, which is a very, very fast shutter speed, an ISO of 200, and a 24 millimeter lens, which is also a fairly wide angle lens. Okay, so now we're going to come back to here and we're going to fill in our ISO, which is a 200, which is also, again, low light sensitivity, so we have a nice sharp image without a lot of noise. The f-stop is at 2.8, which is a shallow depth of field, which unfortunately doesn't show up as much in this image because we are shooting with a very wide angle lens, which does impact the depth of field. And our shutter speed is 1/6400th of a second, which is a very, very, very fast shutter speed. So if we look at this image, this is very sharp here. As we go to the back of the image, to the point here where the tracks end, it's also pretty sharp. So we have a very, even though 2.8 tends to be a shallow depth of field, this particular image, everything is pretty much in focus, and that is due to the fact that we're using a wide angle lens, a 24 millimeter lens, which tends to have more of the image in focus even when you're using like an f2.8. And we are done with this lesson.